When feminism got going back in the 1960s, the line was that the only thing holding women back from complete equality with men was a whole lot of rules and regulations laid down by the patriarchal culture to keep women back. And the idea was that if you just got rid of these rules and regulations and these completely arbitrary constraints on women, it was like telling people with red hair or people who were left-handed they couldn't do this, that, or the other thing. Once you got rid of these artificial constraints, women would just blossom forth and be equal to men. And I think they genuinely believe this on some level or other, but I don't think any of these feminists in the 60s really gave serious consideration to something which I call the dirty little secret of feminism, which has shown itself to be the real dominant feature of the experience of women and feminists trying to win equality with men. And that dirty little secret is that basically women do not want to do a lot of things that feminist ideologues say that other women, not themselves, other women should do to prove how right their ideology is. For example, driving big trucks in the Pilbara or driving jackhammers, If you're a feminist public servant in Canberra or a feminist academic in some air-conditioned office in one of the sort of major cities, you want women to sort of get out there and prove how equal they are to men by doing all the sort of dirty, dangerous, difficult jobs there are out there. The feminist academics aren't going to do that. They just want other women to do it. And what is very evident over the last few decades is something that, as I mentioned before, I don't know whether they lack the imagination to predict that this may eventuate, that in fact women in the main do not want to do a lot of things that are supposed to define equality with men. The classic example of this is participation of women in the armed services. After Herculean efforts were made to promote women in various fields of work, various vocations, the Australian military found that, as of a couple of decades ago, something like 12% of the Australian Army was made up of women. And this, of course, falls short of 50%. But as of a few years ago, the Australian Army, run by a lot of sensitive New Age army guys, doing anything they could to appear as progressive as they could, set about trying to increase the participation of women in the Australian Army from 12% to 14%, which I think, why not 50%, But anyway, that was deemed to be some huge step forward in participation of women in the armed services. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work out that maybe what we're dealing with here in this instance is that women just, by and large, do not want to go into the army, as they, by and large, do not want to do a whole lot of other things. But this does not sort of stand in the way of our progressivist generals, tough-talking He-Man generals who are out there, who I presume would be happy if we had an entirely female army. I don't know. I don't know what goes on inside their minds. So anyway, they gave us this arbitrary target of 14% female participation in the army. And it got to the point where some months ago, the Australian Army actually put a stop to recruiting men into the army because there was no other way to increase the relative numbers of women entering the Australian Army. So it had this ridiculous situation where only women need apply. And as I said, I don't know whether these guys want an army that is 50% women or 100% women. But anyway, what they have experienced is that this whole feminist ideological view hits the wall at 12% or whatever it is, the number of women in the Australian Army, and simply belies the notion that women are free to do anything. And in fact, they're being actively promoted beyond all reasonable means to have women participate in all fields of human endeavour that have traditionally been male-dominated, simply to prove a point about the rightness of feminist ideology. But actual women won't cooperate. Some years ago, the US military decided to allow women to fly combat jets in the US Air Force and Navy. This proved something of a disaster because women, frankly, are simply not very good at operating heavy machinery, and there were one or two celebrated air crashes of female pilots who just weren't up to the demands of flying a frontline combat jet. But that doesn't deter our sensitive New Age generals and all the rest of it. So they then went on a kick, not just allowing women to fly combat jets, but they found that women weren't volunteering to fly combat jets. So they embarked on a policy of actually encouraging women to put their hands up to fly combat jets. Among men, there'd be fierce competition to be able to do this, but when it came to women, the obvious thing was that women, in general, just do not want to do that. They could not get enough women putting their hands up to fly frontline aircraft. And out of all this, you get the complete collapse of this original principle that the only thing standing in the way of women was artificial constraints and rules that say you can't do this and you can't do that, which is so obviously past. There is nothing standing in the way of any woman getting into any field. Indeed, we've reached this natural tipping point of where it's very plain that it was never about artificial prohibitions. The prohibitions were a kind of a side issue to the primary issue that women just do not have the aptitude to do a lot of things that men do in the natural course of things. And this is just a complete kick in the solar plexus to the feminist line that you can politically change the fundamental differences that exist between men and women. So the Australian Army, I don't know whether they've reached their magical target of 14%, which is a totally meaningless figure, because why shouldn't it be 50% if it had any validity to it, if there was any underlying sense to this whole sort of philosophical view of things. But of course, in these days of transgenderism, I'm sure that vast numbers of men could rock up to recruitment centres and simply make an official declaration that they identify as women and will then gain entry into the military and to various other fields of endeavour. Just declare that they're a woman. That's all they have to do. Simply express themselves. That way they don't have to prove their female, womanly character traits that have existed in the past or whatever like that. They can just sort of simply declare that they identify as a woman and gain entry. That way. That might be one way out of it. Anyway, that's all for now.